yoga, going all the way back to the Vedas, is inseparable from a recognition of the connectivity between the elements and the human person. And as that relationship is cultivated and brought into high relief, the mindset develops that I love this springtime.
Welcome to the Awaken Magazine podcast, where we feature inspiring leaders who are helping our world awaken to love. I'm your host, David Trotter, and today I want to share with you an enriching conversation with Christopher Chapple. This was recorded live at the Yoga Expo in Los Angeles. Christopher is a Doshi Professor and Director of Yoga Studies at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And in this conversation, we dive into his unique upbringing, his prophetic dreams, his early awakening, and his deep devotion to yoga and academics. We talk about the unfolding of yoga here in the West, how it has evolved over the years, and he drops some serious names and knowledge on us in this conversation. We also talk about his latest book, which is the integration of yoga and ecology, the care of the environment. Now, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Awaken Magazine podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. Click subscribe, rate, and review the show. By leaving a review, it's an easy way for you to help us spread the word about the great interviews that we're releasing each and every week. All right, let's dive into this conversation with Christopher Chapple. Chris, it is great to be with you today. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
I want to hear a bit about your own journey of awakening to however you would describe that. Consciousness, mindfulness, spirituality. Did you grow up in a home that had faith or spirituality a part of it, or was that something that came into your life later on? I want to hear a bit about your story.
Okay, I think it really starts from the stories I hear about myself as a young child. A lot of exuberance and a lot of chattiness. And I was an avid reader from a very young age. And I remember when I was 7 and I was standing in our kitchen in a rural farmhouse in the Great Lakes region of New York State. And as I was looking at this cracked paint behind the radiator, it occurred to me that I would never forget that moment, and that what I would not forget about the moment is that experience of raw awareness. And I remember also that same year having dreams that put me into sort of a reflection on this thing that we think we are isn't really who we are. And one dream in particular was my molars were coming in, a molar that is no more. And it was like, oh no, I have to now live in this body that is going to give me trouble. And this was sort of a 7-year-old launch into a life of reflection. As I mentioned, we lived in a very rural part of the country. My father had been invited in by the Ojibwe peoples in the 1920s when he was a forestry student at University of Toronto. And he conveyed the wisdom that he learned, but it was just body wisdom about how to walk soundlessly, how to observe, and how to really watch the unfolding of the seasons and the movement of animals. That was the gift of my father. My mother was part of the research of the J.B. Rhine Institute at Duke University in the 1930s. And she introduced us to, both in terms of her stories, but also in terms of her capacities, into the worlds of clairvoyance and telepathy. And she was recruited from the University of Buffalo to go down to Duke to participate in these real life experiments using signal cards where she could transmit and receive sequences of patterns that were clearly beyond the norm. So this was early clinical research on what is possible beyond the mind. So that was sort of the environment in which I was raised. And I was really gifted with, as I said, being an avid reader and really following through. As a teenager, a formative book was by Philip Kapleau, The Three Pillars of Zen. And this book introduced me at the age of 13 to the practice of Zen meditation with breath counting, which I found amazingly helpful as, the monkey mind teenager that I think every teenager is. And that sort of set me on a path of daily meditation. Then when I was 15, my good friend with whom I had traveled to the Zen Center in Rochester, New York, brought me to Quaker meeting. And I learned how to meditate in the Quaker tradition, and also in that environment found my first real scholarly article, which was about William Blake. It was a Pendle Hill pamphlet. And I was inspired to do a major research project on William Blake, the great English mystic, in concert with my studies of George Fox, the mystic who founded the Quaker tradition. And then I was chosen by Gannett newspapers of all organizations to receive a scholarship to go to Northwestern University when I was 16 for their National High School Summer Institute. And I, during the course of that summer, read a little bit at a time the introduction to the Tibetan Book of the Dead by Carl Jung and the Evans Wentz translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and really sort of broadened out my perspectives on Buddhism a bit. And I also, in the months following, read very, very carefully the writings not only of Baba Ram Dass in the book Be Here Now, but also the writings of Meher Baba, his Everything in the Nothing, his book on, it was called 3 Volumes of Discourses on really yoga philosophy and Sufi philosophy. And this predisposed me in my dreams to have sequence. This was when I was still 17, a sequence of amazing dreams that actually came to be. And one dream in particular, I was walking down Genesee Street, up above the Genesee River in the Finger Lakes region of New York State. And Meher Baba was in this dream, and he brought me into this house and disappeared. And this house was a house that I knew, except when I entered it, it was a different house on Genesee Street. But no, this was 107 Eden Avenue in Massapequa, New York. And I remember sitting at an oak table with a very firm, well-built oak chair with an inlaid tile of a Dutch windmill and long bookshelves with, I remember the titles, the Waters book, the Book of the Hopi, the Klukorn book on the Navajo. And there was a woman there. She was dressed in white, though I never saw her dressed in white after having met her in person. but she was talking about meditation and things philosophical and yogic. And I, as with all of my dreams, wrote it down and then went off to college and started studying Sanskrit my very first semester. And I had an 8 o'clock philosophy class, and this young woman, Carol Zeiler, talked a lot about her yoga teacher. And at Thanksgiving, I traveled the 400 plus miles from Long Island, or rather from Buffalo to Long Island. And there she was. So I transferred universities, started a very intense 12-year journey on the yoga path with Garani Anjali. And within this community, we developed a whole series of not only the yoga world and the yoga ashram, but we also had a restaurant for 25 years. My wife and I co-managed a bookstore and a community education center. We had an art gallery. And all the while I was studying Tibetan and Sanskrit at Stony Brook University, and then went on to do my MA and PhD at Fordham University in Sanskrit literature and in the world's religions. So after working on that first book and teaching back at Stony Brook after getting my PhD, in 1985, I landed here in Los Angeles at Loyola Marymount University, where I've been ever since.
Amazing. Amazing. So many people especially, I guess I would say the United States, have enjoyed yoga, right? Yeah. They'll sign up for their local yoga class, get your first week for free, whatever it might be. How do you navigate the deep academic and embodied awareness of yoga that you have, right? Mm-hmm. Like I said, I'm hearing from you, okay, this is not only academic in some way, like this deep knowledge, but also an embodiment of the practices.
Right.
How do you navigate when people are like, oh, I love yoga? Yeah.
Well, I sort of look at it and teach it historically, that it was the Transcendentalists, it was Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson who had read those early translations, just being revealed to the world in the 1850s of the Bhagavad Gita, particularly, and the Upanishads. They also, of course, read the early translations of Confucius and Lao Tzu. And that group in Concord, the school that Henry Alcott established, out of which we received that beautiful book called Little Women, which was one of my childhood favorites, Walden Pond, cites the Bhagavad Gita. And all of those were part of my youth reading. And as I then came to learn, they set the stage in Boston and at Harvard for the work of William James. And William James, sort of the father of pragmatism, the father of American psychology, invited, or rather quoted, Swami Vivekananda. And I'm certain that William James must have heard Swami Vivekananda as he was lecturing. He first came for the Parliament of the World's Religions in 1893. And then other yogis came as well, including Paramahamsa Yogananda, who came first to Boston and then ended up in Los Angeles, establishing the Self-Realization Fellowship, writing the autobiography of a yogi. And all of this happened within the short space of 30 years. And then the Asian Exclusion Act came, and Indians were no longer invited to settle in the United States. So the brilliance of someone like Yogananda, who did his degree at the Saharanpur Baptist College in Calcutta, really knew the Bible very, very well and sort of infused many of his teachings with very American Protestant-friendly insights. established a community, as did Swami Vivekananda, of people and leaders that carry forth this work in a very American idiom. A wonderful man called Howard Thurman, a Black theologian from the United States, received a fellowship to study in India in 1935 and 1936. And he met with Mahatma Gandhi as Gandhi was formulating and reformulating his resistance to British imperialism, which a dozen years later was successful. But what Howard Thurman did was observe Gandhi's strategies, observe Gandhi's techniques. And he rose to a challenge put forward by Gandhi. And Gandhi said to Thurman, "Why do you follow the religion of your oppressors?" And he was curious because, why wouldn't the Black people of America rise up and become, Muslim or, something other than, as Gandhi put it, the religion of the oppressor? And this prompted Howard Thurman to think deeply about the message of Jesus, as had Paramahansa Yogananda. And he wrote a book called Jesus and the Disinherited that became the go-to book for Martin Luther King Jr., became the go-to book for James Lawson, and inspired a new way of engaging, a Gandhian way, which, full circle, was inspired in part by Emerson's essay, Civil Disobedience. And lo and behold, in 1965, the world changed. Civil rights laws went into effect that changed immigration, and the world once again was open. People came from the African continent, from the Asian continent, in numbers unknown before. And that long drought between 1920 and 1965 ended. My teacher landed in America, so many others, including Swami Vishnudevananda, Swami Rama, Amrit Desai, Yogi Bhajan. All of them were guys except for my guru. And that second wave of yoga echoed the first wave in many ways, and that virtually every yoga center was a meditation center. Every yoga center was a cultural center and incorporated as a nonprofit for educational and spiritual undertakings. So that's second wave yoga, that's me. And then, and that inspired myself and various others to go into academia as well. And then the third wave happened starting in the 1990s. And my good friend and colleague, Dr. Larry Payne, inspired people, oh, you don't need to bother to do a nonprofit, just do an LLC. So the Modern Yoga Studio was born, formulated primarily by disciples of the disciples of Krishnamacharya. And Krishnamacharya created three significant lineages. One of them was the Pattabhi Jois school in Mysore. Another was the Iyengar school in Pune. And another was the Deshikachar school established by his own son in Bangalore. And this ushered in a physical yoga, not to the exclusion of the philosophical or the spiritual, but was taken up by Americans and Europeans in a very physical and studio-based modality. So when I started a small study group in the 1990s, as this was coming to be, founders of Yoga Works, various people that were very involved with this physical yoga had gotten to that point where they really, really wanted to know the philosophy. They wanted to have the
depth,
wisdom, the depth that Krishnamacharya certainly possessed. So we started a study group in my home at first, and then so many people had come through from all different paths of yoga. So we started a certificate course in 2001, and this evolved into a Master of Arts in Yoga Studies in 2013, although we still continue with the certificates as well.
So talk to me a bit more about the program that you have at Loyola Marymount. You just mentioned the certificate, there's a master's program. I mean, who is this for? And how long is it? What does it entail? How do they end up, for lack of a better word, leveraging it in their life?
Absolutely. So we started the certificates in 2001, and they require, and this is the Yoga Philosophy Certificate, open to people from all walks of life, from all over the globe. It's continuing education, so it's the extension wing of the university.
Is it online or in person?
It's both.
Okay.
And it requires 20 hours of the study of the Yoga Sutra, 20 hours of the study of the Sanskrit language, 10 hours of the study of the Bhagavad Gita, 10 hours of the Sankhya-Karika, another core philosophical text, 10 hours of the Upanishads, and then another 5 courses, 10 hours each, that are electives. So I just
This sounds like a master's. This is that's intense.
120 hours altogether, but yeah, it's sort of a gateway into a master's degree. And I just finished last week a 40-hour sequence in yoga sadhana. So we did a 10-hour, both in person at the Hill Street Center in Santa Monica, 10-hour sequence on the yamas, ahimsa, satya, steya, brahmacharya, parigraha, the core ethics of yoga, followed with 10 hours on the niyamas, the lifestyle enhancements of purity, of contentment, of rigor, of study, of devotion. We did a 10-hour study of elemental meditations that is, I wrote a book that is arising from this very important training that we received back in the 1970s.
And the name, just for people,
the name of this book is Living Landscapes, Meditations on the 5 Elements in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain Yogas. And also just finished a 10-hour sequence on meditation and visualization and mantra recitation, focusing on the elemental mantras, but also the Devi mantra and the Gayatri mantra. So those who chose to have that be part of their class, that very experiential component, is part of that yoga, or could have been part of that yoga philosophy certification. Then I met Larry Payne, guest lectured when he was teaching at UCLA Medical Center, and he floated the idea of a yoga therapy certificate right at the founding of the International Association of Yoga Therapists. And we launched a very comprehensive training for yoga therapy. And we would always get 50 people, 50 people, 50 people. So within a decade, we had certificated more than 1,000 people, both in yoga therapy, yoga philosophy, and a third certificate in yoga and ecology. And the university took notice, and they said, "Tell us about these people." And I said, "They're amazing." So we went through the process of approval at the invitation of the university to establish a Master of Arts in Yoga Studies. So that started in 2013. We've now created more than 100 yoga masters. Some have gone on into PhD work at various institutions. Some have now landed tenure track positions in community colleges teaching yoga. Others have created just places for themselves within the world that are very, very inspiring. One of our persons who came as an activist, Gayatri Sehgal, very committed to animal rights, now is the emotional support counselor for activists, using the tools of yoga to give the tools needed for the activists to continue forward with whatever they need to be doing. So very, very proud. A couple of them have become significant spiritual teachers in really a wholesome way. So many different pathways being pursued.
Amazing.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found interesting was I don't know if it was an emphasis or track of the master's program, is Yoga and Ecology. Was it a track or emphasis? How would you describe that?
Yeah, in the yoga philosophy certificate, as well as suffused through the MA curriculum, there's an attentiveness and an attunement with human-earth relations. And as this book really points out, yoga, going all the way back to the Vedas, is inseparable from a recognition of the connectivity between the elements and the human person. And as that relationship is cultivated and brought into high relief, the mindset develops that I love this springtime. I love the change of summer. I love even, yes, the quiet that comes with winter. What can we do to honor? What can we do to protect? What can we do to infuse the day-to-day life of a yoga person with the recognition of the symbiosis between our place on the planet and the gift of life itself?
And your book, Living Landscapes, Meditations on the Elements in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain Yogas, that dives into that.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
And I've also published, I have a book coming out with Simon & Schuster called, it'll be out, I think, in May, called Embodied Ecology, Yoga and Environmentalism. So again, I've been reflecting on this for more than 50 years and have traveled throughout India with this question in mind, have done extensive interviews and work with Vandana Shiva, the great food activist, as well as MC Mehta, who was the person responsible for the protection of the Taj Mahal, going back decades and decades, but also for the implementation of CNG required vehicles in urban areas that otherwise were burning just incredibly harmful kerosene tuk-tuks. So there's so much that can be said and that I've sort of delved into over the course of many years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've been to India myself a dozen times or so and done a lot of humanitarian work there. And one of the things that just blows my mind is, in the United States, we have such a strong infrastructure of waste management,
Exactly,
trash, and how we handle that. Now, I don't know if we're probably not doing so good once it makes it to the landfill, but we don't have it in our streets or our homes, so forth. And so, how do you like navigate? Okay, there's this like rich history of the connection between yoga and ecology, and yet a little bit of a disconnect of the average day-to-day life of the person who lives in India. That like there's not. I mean, the places that I've gone, there's just not trash service.
Exactly.
It's a lot of burning of it. It's burning the trash, essentially. How do you handle that disconnect?
Yeah. Well, Gandhi himself commented, there's a beautiful Gandhi museum right in the heart of Delhi. And he commented that we don't do well with our garbage here. And this is when garbage was literally biodegradable. This is before packaging. This is before plastics. And as packaging and plastics came on the scene in India, people were totally unprepared. And the government has implemented a campaign called Swachh Bharat that has lifted up the civic duty of tending to one's waste. Historically, India would, that's the job of those other people, and just keep moving and just throw it over the wall. Someone
Totally
will
throw it over the wall.
Throw it
Yes.
over the wall. And, in a non-tech environment or a non-industrial, non-consumerist environment, it sort of worked. It wasn't perfect. But now everyone has to become mindful and everyone has to get involved. And believe it or not, I've been going to India since 1981. I know every newcomer to India, like, oh, there's so much trash.
Right.
But it's so much better than it used to be. So much better. Yeah.
I remember my first time walking with, new Indian friends, and they had a bag of chips or a candy bar or something, and then just threw it on the ground. I was mortified. I'm like, I went over and picked it up. I'm like, oh, this is like a moral issue, for somebody in the States, don't litter.
Well, as a baby boomer, I well remember, the joy of being in the car with my parents, of course, no seatbelts, windows fully rolled down. And when we finished our popsicle, out went the wrapper, out went the stick. And it wasn't until Lady Bird Johnson started the anti-littering campaign around 1963, 1964, that we began to get awareness. And then with the implementation of, under Nixon of all people, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, that we discovered that burning is not the way to get rid of garbage, and solid waste disposal became the new technology of the 1970s. So when I landed in India only less than a dozen years later, it really did not surprise me because my upbringing in the 60s was free trash, just throw it out anywhere. And it took a major national campaign and the rise of the solid waste industry to turn things around. So what India faces right now are some air pollution problems that are due to agricultural practices. It's going to take a great deal of political will, but literally the air does become unbreathable in cities like Delhi periodically. There's a lot of work to be done.
Well, enough about trash. Tell us where we can find out about the master's program and how people can follow you and your work.
Well, we're on Instagram. We're easy to Google. And we have constant new continuing education courses. And we're always encouraging people, step your toe in the water. And then the certificates are sort of the gateway. And then on our website, we have all of the instructions for applying for the Master of Arts in Yoga Studies. And we also, on the website, have detailed descriptions of our curriculum as well as our faculty.
Wonderful. And what the website is?
Yoga Studies.
Okay, all right.
LMU.
Check out the Yoga Studies. Great. We'll put all the links to the website and the Instagram in the show notes and on our website. So, Christopher, thank you so much for hanging out and being with us today.
Every success.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Awaken Magazine podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and our other conversations, would you mind taking a moment to leave a 5-star review and maybe even a comment on Spotify or Apple Podcasts? That's one of the ways that you can give back to the show and help us reach more people. And of course, feel free to share the episode with a friend. And if you're not already on our email list, we send out an inspiring email every Monday morning full of articles and interviews. Just head on over to awakenedmagazine.com and click subscribe and join for free. Our hope is that all the resources we share will help our world continue awakening to love.